Hello, and welcome back to American Motherhood, the podcast where we explore how society and politics shape motherhood in America. I'm Bethany, a mom of 2 young girls in Central Ohio, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Yana Dowdy, who's joining us as the host of American Motherhood's new Schoolhouse channel. Yana and I met last fall while working together on the Yes for Westerville Schools campaign in support of our district's school levy. If you ever have the pleasure of working with her, you'll quickly discover that she is incredibly passionate about the power and possibilities of education. In this series, Yana will break down how our public schools are funded, which is an incredibly complex issue believed to be one of the most critical concerns facing Ohio families right now. She'll help us understand how state policy decisions impact our local schools, our kids' classrooms, and ultimately their love of learning. Okay, Yana, before we dive in, can you please tell us about yourself and what brought you here?
Yeah, thanks, Bethany. So my name is Yana Dowdy. I'm also a mom of 2 kids that are in elementary school here in Westerville. I am not a teacher by training. I'm a pharmacist, but I'm vested in my kids' education. I had a very strong public education growing up. I came here to the United States as an immigrant, grew up in Cleveland, great schools in Cleveland, and I owe a lot to my public education. It helped kind of launch me into college, my doctorate degree, my residency, and so on. So we moved to Westerville almost 5 years ago to make sure that our kids had a strong public education here as well. I got involved in my kids' PTA a few years ago, thinking I would be helping with classroom parties, doing little goodie bags or whatever. But the more meetings I attended, the more I quickly realized that PTA actually funded a lot of things that I just assumed the schools paid for. And I guess I took for granted. I think about field trips were probably funded by schools. I quickly learned they were not. Various classroom projects like the 3rd grade squid dissection my son just participated in. That was a line item on our PTA budget. Busing and transportation for field trips, a lot of extracurricular programs, and even things like beanbag chairs and flexible seating that lets the kids wiggle around. None of that is part of the school budget. So it kind of got me more involved in the school and the district and thinking, how do schools run? Who pays for them? Why are certain things not included? That kind of led me down the road of the recent school levy. Back last November, I was asked to participate in the levy committee. Our school had a big funding gap, and I helped to lead the community outreach efforts for the Yes for Westerville Schools levy. Had a lot of in-depth conversations with the administration of the school district, learned a lot of things about the budget that I didn't previously know. I met you through that effort, which I'm very thankful for. So it kind of got a lot of us talking after the levy had passed that we should educate more people with all the things that we learned over the last few months. I'm talking about regular people. So not people that have hours throughout the day to dedicate to this, but busy moms that maybe have a few minutes to listen to a little podcast clip to learn a little bit more so that they are able to come to the polls prepared and even able to just have educated conversations with family, friends, and neighbors about these topics.
I think particularly what we learned through that campaign experience is there are a lot of misconceptions about levies and how our schools are funded. And obviously we'll talk a lot about that. But last fall on the podcast, I had Nicole Marshall, our CFO and treasurer, and then also Angie Hamburg, our superintendent. So those are really great episodes to go back to if you're local to Westerville and thinking about how this levy made a difference for our schools. But moving forward, this series will outline a very complex issue so that, as Yana said, regular everyday moms can understand it. All right, so where do we start?
So today we're going to talk about where school money comes from, why our tax dollars are tied to schools, why one district might look very different than another district that might just be, a few minutes or a few miles down the road. So I want you to think of 3 legs of a bar stool. And those are the 3 main sources of school funding. You've got your federal dollars, your state dollars, and your local dollars. The federal component is actually the smallest share. It's usually less than 10%. About 5 to 10% of the annual school budget comes from the federal level. And that part is very much in flux, especially with administration changes and their changes in priority as well. Then you've got about 90% left. The 90% is supposed to be split as an even share between the state level and the local level being these taxes that you see on the ballots. We're not quite seeing that in Ohio. Every state's a little different, but what you're hearing a lot in Ohio lately is that the state share is dropping, which is why you're seeing a lot of the local levies on the ballots to make up for the gap that the state isn't funding. So when people make the talking point that the government really funds the schools, really it's local communities that are funding schools, mostly with our tax dollars at this point. Breaking that down even more, local funding comes from several different kinds of tax dollars. First, you've got your property tax, and this is probably the most common kind you see. This tax is what's connected to the value of your property or your home. These go frequently towards school districts' operating expenses. So things to really keep the lights on every day. Think about the teacher salaries, what it costs to run all the buses, the utilities, the counselors and the aides that are in all the buildings across the district. The other side of that coin is income taxes. This is usually a specific percentage of your income that's going to be taken and put into your school district's piggy bank, essentially. And a lot of this is usually used to stabilize the funding. There's also different kinds of income tax levies. You might see income tax levies that are only for earned income that don't count, retirement income, disability, anything like that. Although these things are very hard to go and ask the community to approve, the nice thing once these do get approved is that these dollars really are tied to the school district. They don't go back into a state piggy bank that later have to be divided. It's money that's guaranteed to stay with the school district. A lot of parents notice that their school district and maybe a nearby school district just down the road can look very different financially. And that's hard for people to understand given they might just be a few miles or a few minutes apart. So let's break down the why behind that. Number one, we talked about the majority of school funding usually comes from local tax dollars. And the foundation, like I said, of those local tax dollars is usually tied to property tax. But having funding tied mostly to property taxes becomes a problem when you have very wealthy districts with a lot of new homes that are praising well, more businesses, maybe more commercial properties is going to raise a lot more money with property taxes. And when you compare that to less affluent school districts, maybe more rural, more farmland, houses are more spread apart, there's less of them, there's going to be less tax dollars. So that's a huge differentiator. So when you have already this big gap between communities that might be very close together, and then you add an extra layer of political climate, maybe state and federal level, where all of those political agendas might cause fluctuations in their contributions to state budgets, the education opportunities are really going to depend on the geography of the school district, unfortunately. And that's why zip codes have become a destiny, and certain districts are going to repeatedly be asking you to approve levies to try to close the gaps that they're experiencing, and these debates are never going to go away unless something at a larger level changes. Mm-hmm. My goal is for you to just remember some key pieces of information next time you go to the ballot or next time you want to have an educated conversation with some friends, some family members, neighbors, even elected officials. For our next episode, we're answering a question almost every parent asks at some point. Why do schools keep coming back to voters? Because once you understand how school funding works, levies suddenly make a lot more sense.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Yana. All right. Until next time.